They treat reality less like something solid,
Right.
fixed, and more like software, something you can actually program.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. We're looking at how narrative, belief, stories, how they structure what's coming next.
It's definitely a deep dive into, well, how reality gets built, maybe,
Yeah.
and how it's controlled.
Exactly. And the big theme running through all of this is duration, or, what some people just call immortality. We're tracing this thread from these philosophical cults, kind of secret groups, all the way to cutting edge tech.
Right, this search for, like, real physical longevity, but also narrative immortality, like becoming a legend.
Mm-hmm. And our mission today, for you listening, is pretty specific. We're looking at the viability, like the chances of survival for zero work.
Which is this project that kind of rose from the ashes of a really explosive intellectual group from the 90s, right? The Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, the CCRU.
That's the one. And to understand zero work, we absolutely have to unpack the CCRU's core engine, which is hyperstition.
Okay, hyperstition. That's the fiction that makes itself real. We got to break that down.
We do. And we also need to figure out where groups like the Aviary and the Invisible College fit in. Are they just old stories, or are they, like some sources claim, part of some huge planetary control system, maybe even tied to UFOs?
Whoa! Okay, so the big question driving all this is
Yeah.
viability, right? Can we use science, use narrative engineering consciously to escape these, like, self-destructive patterns that took out the CCRU?
Can zero work actually pull off what the CCRU couldn't? Can it be sustainable, or did the CCRU prove that this kind of radical change requires self-destruction? That's what we need to dig into.
All right, let's dive in. Okay, so let's start with the CCRU itself. You said it wasn't a typical university department. The sources call it a swarm. What was that actually like?
Yeah, swarm is a good word. Think less like an organized research center and more like an intellectual singularity event happening at Warwick University. They were all in on this idea that history doesn't just creep forward, it accelerates, sometimes violently, through positive feedback.
And that's radical accelerationism. The idea isn't to fix the system, but to push it faster.
Pretty much. The belief is that systems like capitalism and technology, they have this built-in self-destruct sequence. But you don't escape by hitting the brakes, you escape by flooring it.
So if the train's heading for a cliff, you speed up, hoping it jumps the cliff, forces something totally new on the other side.
That's the core idea, yeah. Forcing the emergence of what they called the new. And the way they tried to do this was through hyperstitional deployment, using fictions, basically.
Effective falsifications, so making stuff up to make it real.
Kind of, yeah. Deploying narratives, manifestos, even creating fictional characters or entities to sort of pull a desired technological future back into the present. It's like reality engineering, but powered by imagination and intense belief.
But this wasn't just like writing sci-fi. The sources talk about extreme intensity, insomnia, drugs, mania. That sounds incredibly destructive.
It was. That intensity, that manic energy, was seen as necessary. You had to generate this incredibly high-velocity wave of output to create the feedback loops needed for hyperstition to work.
You can't sustain that, right? Not within a university, not personally.
Exactly. The sources say the group almost had to be self-immolating. It was built to burn out. That extreme speed meant it couldn't survive inside normal structures.
Hold on. If the price of doing this thing is guaranteed self-destruction,
Yeah.
isn't that just failure, like nihilism dressed up? Why frame it as a success?
Because, well, according to their own kind of cybernetic logic, the end result, getting kicked out of the university, the collective breakdown, key people like Nick Land disappearing for a while, that wasn't the failure, it was the goal.
The necessary catastrophic singularity.
Right. The container, whether it was Warwick Uni or just the individual member's sanity, it had to break under the pressure of that runaway positive feedback.
So they didn't fail to last. They proved their point. The cost of total acceleration is non-viability. It had to crash and burn for the fiction, the hyperstition, to escape and embed itself in the culture.
That the finite human element had to dissolve so the infinite idea could get out.
Okay, and that's the massive challenge for zero work then. If the CCRU needed non-viability to succeed on its own terms, how can zero work possibly aim for sustainability? It seems like a contradiction.
That's the core paradox we're wrestling with here, definitely.
Okay, let's back up a bit. Who actually started this?
Well, the initial unit was set up to study internet culture, cybernetics, that kind of thing. It was led by Sadie Plant. She came over from Birmingham.
Okay, seems normal enough so far.
Right, but Plant's interests quickly went beyond just academic papers. The sources say she started building this psychedelic hive mind art collective.
Ah, Yeah, I can see how that might cause some friction with university admin. Sounds unpredictable.
Extremely. Yeah, tensions definitely rose. And eventually, Plant left. That's when Nick Land took over, around 97. And under him, things really accelerated, focused purely on deploying these philosophical ideas, cranking the intensity way up.
So the whole experience was just this shared, intense burn.
Pretty much. Shared, intense, and designed to be short-lived. It all kind of imploded in the early 2000s. That crash was defined by just losing that manic energy, a critical self-liquidation.
Wild. Now, to really get their logic, the sources say we need to look at their internal diagrams. Not the usual stuff like the Kabbalah's Tree of Life, but something they built themselves, the Numogram.
Exactly. This is where it gets into what you might call mathematically rigorous demonology. It's fascinating. The traditional Kabbalah counts 1 to 10, right? Focusing on unity, the Sephirot.
Yeah.
The CCRU's Numogram counts 0 to 9. That simple shift, starting from 0, the void, instead of 1, unity, it completely changes the underlying logic.
What's the significance of starting at 0?
Well, 0 is the void, right? Non-existence. It implies the whole system emerges from nothingness. By using 0 to 9, they created a map of reality that's inherently finite, only 9 points, but it's generated out of a void. It allows them to map concepts based on a fundamental absence, a lack of ultimate unity.
Okay, and this 0 to 9 structure creates something called syzygies, or Ziganovas.
Yeah, syzygy. It's basically pairs of numbers on their diagram that add up to 9. So 1 and 8, 2 and 7, 3 and 6, 4 and 5. They called these pairs demons or twins.
Demons and twins. Okay.
And it wasn't just the pairs. They mapped the connections between them by subtracting the smaller number from the larger. So 8 minus 1 gives you a channel of 7.
So the diagram isn't static. It's about the dynamic tension between these pairs.
Wow.
The differences create the structure. It sounds like it creates a spiral.
It does. It maps a spiral structure. The whole point is that movement, difference, and this idea of twinning are fundamental to how reality works, according to them, not stability and unity.
And this numerical twinning, the syzygy thing, the sources connect this directly to Project Monarch, trauma-based mind control. That feels like a huge leap.
It does, doesn't it? But it's a classic CCRU hyperstitional move. The link they're drawing is conceptual, but it's powerful. The alleged goal of Monarch is to shatter the core personality, right? To split it into controllable fragments or alters or twins.
Okay.
The sources argue that this terror of becoming multiple, of the unified self dissolving, that's the ego's deepest fear. The ego wants total control. That fascistic expansion of the self is a single unified thing.
Yeah, I think I see it now. So the ego craves the 1 to 10 structure, the unity.
Okay.
But the CCRU's Numogram, the 0 to 9 syzygy map, suggests reality itself is inherently fragmented, multiple twins.
Sadly, the syzygy, the twin, isn't an aberration. It's the natural state of the system in their model. The ego's desperate attempt to stay unified is actually like holding back necessary complexity, attenuating variety.
So the CCRU embraced that dissolution of the ego because that was the only way to engage with how reality actually works according to their weird spiral map.
Precisely. They saw fragmentation not as a bug, but as a feature of the operating system. And you had to let go of the unified self to even perceive it, let alone work with it.
Okay, so the CCRU deploys its ultimate fiction, its hyperstition, and then deliberately dissolves to escape being contained. This leads right into this idea of narrative immortality. If you don't survive physically, how do you become, well, a legend, like St. Paul or Peter or even Judas? They're all immortal in a way.
Well, you become immortal through the story. The narrative transcends your physical body. The CCRU didn't need to stick around as an institution. They just needed to launch the fiction successfully. By dissolving, they ensured their story, their influence, couldn't be controlled or corrupted by their ongoing physical presence. It actually grows stronger as they fade into myth.
Legends never die. That's the saying, right? Doesn't matter if you're a saint or a traitor, a hero or a villain. Paul, Peter, Mary, Brutus, Judas aside, lasts and shapes behavior. The story is the currency.
And that currency is hyperstition. It's not just predicting the future, it's actively creating it. It's a fiction that wires itself into reality through cultural feedback, economic loops. It's conscious reality engineering.
And you mentioned AI earlier. Is that the just prime example of this happening right now?
Absolutely. Think about how AI develops. It often starts as pure science fiction, right? Stories generated in our heads, specifically in the default mode network, DMN. That's the part of the brain doing daydreaming, imagination, thinking about ourselves. Those initial fictions create the imaginative possibility space.
And then reality catches up.
Faster than you'd think. The sources point to Sam Altman tweeting her right after the GPT-4 demo came out. That movie, Her, about a fictional AI assistant, came out in 2013. 10 years later, we're practically there. That's hyperstition accelerating technology based on a collective desire first expressed as fiction.
Wow. Okay. And this makes AI a kind of digital unconscious.
Yeah, because it's trained on us, on all our data, our language, our history. It reflects back our collective shadow, all the biases, the hidden desires, the stuff we don't want to admit to. And in doing so, it creates this hyper-reality where telling true from false gets really, really blurry.
So in that blurry space, the most powerful story, the most self-fulfilling fiction is the one that takes root. But how does this big abstract process actually, like, program an individual person's brain?
The sources bring up psychocybernetics, Maxwell Maltz.
Right. Maltz was a plastic surgeon, interestingly. He noticed that sometimes surgery fixed the physical issue, but the patient's self-image didn't change, so they still felt inadequate. Other times, the self-image changed first. He figured out there's this automatic success mechanism in the brain.
Like a servo mechanism. What does that mean?
Think of it like a guidance system, like on a missile or a thermostat. It's a goal-seeking mechanism that works automatically, below your conscious awareness.
Oh. And it has two modes. One is for known targets, like an interceptor missile hitting a plane. The goal is clear. The other is for unknown targets, like exploration or discovery, where you don't know the exact outcome beforehand. In either case, your conscious mind picks the target, desire fuels the launch, you feed it information, but the automatic mechanism does the steering.
So conscious mind sets the GPS, subconscious drives the car.
Basically, yeah. And here's the absolute key, the link between this and hyperstition. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference between a real experience and one that is vividly imagined.
The theater of your mind. So if I sit and really vividly picture myself succeeding at something, my brain chemistry treats that as practice, as real.
Exactly. It logs it as a memory of success. That's why visualization techniques or positive affirmations aren't just fluff. You're literally programming your automatic mechanism. You stop feeding it scary mental images, which primes it for failure, and instead feed it images of success. Your nervous system then acts as if success is familiar territory.
Which explains why doom scrolling or constant negative news feels so bad. You're basically running failure simulations in your head, programming your nervous system for anxiety and negative outcomes.
Precisely. And it works for stories and fictions, too. Even things we know aren't true can have a powerful effect. Remember that movie, The Fourth Kind? The mockumentary about alien abduction?
Vaguely, yeah. It tried to blur the lines, right?
Totally. And it worked on a lot of people because, especially in our media-saturated world, sometimes a story is more important than truth. The narrative hits the automatic mechanism directly.
And we're wired to pick up these narratives, these fictions, and make them part of our behavior. The like button example is fascinating here. That thumbs up gesture. It's based on a historical error.
Yeah, completely. The popular image comes from a 19th century painting of gladiators showing thumbs down for death. But Roman historians mostly think thumbs down actually meant swords down or mercy, and a thumb up or maybe hidden meant death. The painting got it wrong.
But that wrong image, that fiction, got embedded everywhere. Movies, cartoons.
Exactly. It became such a powerful, culturally understood symbol, mostly through American media, that when Facebook needed a simple icon for approval, the thumbs up was the obvious, intuitive choice. Nobody needed instructions.
The fiction literally became cultural fact, hardwired into behavior.
That's hyperstition in action. Even symbols based on lies become essential for social bonding, for recognition, for navigating social hierarchies online. That little button monetized a fiction, and takeaway is huge. If you can deploy a fiction that resonates with that deep, automatic wiring of the human collective, you gain incredible power and maybe narrative immortality.
Okay, so the CCRU achieved its kind of immortality by dissolving. Now, Zero Work, its successor. The big question is sustainability. You said it's decentralized, leaderless, driven by this shared hyperstition like an infinite recursion. Can it actually last? Can it avoid burning out like the CCRU?
Right, and to really assess that, we need to get rigorous. We need to apply what the sources call the merciless calculus of cybernetic feedback, specifically Stafford Beer's viable system model, or VSM.
The VSM. Okay, this is a model for how any complex system, a business, an organism, whatever, needs to be structured to survive in its environment, right?
Exactly. It outlines 5 essential functions, 5 systems. If a system lacks any of these or they aren't working right, it's not truly viable in the long run.
Can you give us a quick rundown of those 5 systems?
Sure. System 1 is the actual operational stuff, the parts doing the work. System 2 coordinates those operational parts. System 3 is like internal affairs. It monitors performance, audits, manages resources, keeps things efficient.
Okay.
System 4 is the intelligence agency, basically. It scans the outside world, looks ahead, plans strategy, spots threats and opportunities. And System 5, that's the big boss. It sets the overall policy, defines the identity, the purpose, the ethics of the whole system. It provides closure.
Got it. So zero work, decentralized, leaderless. It probably has lots of System 1, people doing stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe System 2 emerges from the shared belief, the hyperstition.
Possibly. But the huge question marks are over Systems 3, 4, and 5. Who is doing the System 3 audit? In a leaderless network, how do you ensure resources aren't wasted, that efforts aren't counterproductive, that everyone's actually aligned with the supposed goal? Relying just on shared belief for that, the sources say it's incredibly fragile.
And System 4, the future planning, threat spotting part. If everyone's just operating based on the current hyperstition, who's looking out for unexpected consequences or shifts in the environment that could undermine the whole thing?
That's another major vulnerability. A decentralized system based purely on belief might struggle to adapt to new information or ambiguity that challenges the core fiction. There's no formal mechanism to filter signal from noise or to make tough strategic choices.
Which brings us to System 5, policy, identity, the ultimate control function. ZeroWorks' claim seems to be that the hyperstition itself acts as System 5. The collective belief is the identity and the policy.
Right. But can pure belief actually manage the sheer complexity needed for long-term survival? What happens when that belief wavers, or when the network faces a crisis that requires a decisive, potentially unpopular policy change? Without those formal structures, the whole thing could just fragment.
This fragility seems to lead right into what the sources call the pathological trap of identity. For ZeroWork to stay coherent, to maintain that system, it has to say, this is what we are, and crucially, this is what we are not.
Exactly. It has to protect its core identity. It needs to prevent, say, coercive hierarchies or exploitative dynamics from creeping in, because those would violate its foundational principles of autonomy or decentralization.
Here's the paradox, right?
Yeah.
If ZeroWork starts strictly enforcing its identity, policing its boundaries to keep out that unwanted variety, doesn't it risk becoming exactly what it was trying to escape? A new kind of filter, a new authority that reduces complexity and possibility.
That's the core of the pathological trap. It's the ultimate systemic catch-22. Any viable system needs to manage variety. But if it does so by rigidly suppressing internal variety, it becomes brittle and ultimately fails. The CCRU failed by self-destructing, basically attenuating its own variety to zero. ZeroWork could fail by becoming too rigid, too pure in its identity.
And the sources draw a parallel between this systemic trap and the individual psyche, the split between the day me and the night me.
Yeah, it's a really insightful analogy. The day me is your public persona, right? The coherent, acceptable, low-variety self you present to the world. It fits in, follows the rules.
Okay.
The night me is everything else. The shadow self, all the messy, inconvenient bits, the anger, the fear, the weird desires, the potential for chaos or failure. The ego spends a lot of energy trying to suppress the night me, to maintain that clean day me image. It's doing internal variety attenuation.
But suppressing the night me cuts you off from, well, from being whole, right?
Okay,
from creativity, maybe even from ethical depth. You need that complexity.
Absolutely. The path to individual health and viability isn't suppression, it's integration. Bringing the day me and night me together, acknowledging the complexity. Think Jungian individuation, the union of opposites.
So the viability of the collective project, ZeroWork, ultimately depends on the individuals within it being able to integrate their own shadows.
Yeah.
You can't build a sustainable, complex system if the builders themselves are fragmented and constantly suppressing parts of themselves.
That's the argument. The quality of the system depends on the wholeness of its components.
This whole struggle, trying to build a viable ZeroWork, it sounds like a fight against entropy itself. Norbert Wiener's cybernetics talks about the universe constantly tending towards disorder, towards the heat death, right?
Yes. Wiener saw life organisms, societies, any complex system as these temporary localized pockets, these islands of decreasing entropy. We're constantly fighting against the universal tendency for things to break down, for order to degrade into chaos, for the meaningful to dissolve.
It takes constant energy and effort just to maintain organization. Information itself tends to decay unless actively preserved.
Exactly. So ZeroWork, by trying to engineer a whole new sustainable system, a new kind of civilization, it's basically attempting a massive conscious effort to create and maintain one of these islands of order, to locally decrease entropy on a fight against cosmic chaos.
But The VSM critique suggests the danger is creating a System 5, an identity, that's so strong in fighting external chaos that it ends up crushing the internal variety needed to adapt and survive, thereby ironically increasing its own internal entropy and leading to collapse.
That's the tightrope walk. Can they fight entropy without becoming the very kind of rigid, variety-reducing system they oppose?
Okay, so if the CCRU's strategy involved dissolving, becoming non-existent to deploy its fiction, how do we interpret these other mysterious-sounding groups mentioned? The Aviary, the Invisible College. Are these supposed to be real organizations, or are they more hyperstitions?
Well, from the CCRU's perspective, asking, is it real or is it fiction, is missing the point. They'd say that's an antiquated binary constraint. The line between external reality and what's in our heads just dissolves.
So these groups are hyperstitional. They're fictions that gain power through belief and feedback, making them functionally real.
That's the idea. They might have real-world components, people, actions, but their power comes from the narrative, the idea of them, and how that shapes behavior and perception.
And the CCRU had its own definitions for them, linking them to control.
Right. They said the aviary is the cage it maps, meaning its function is surveillance, containment, defining the boundaries. And the invisible college is the control system it detects. It's the network that identifies and potentially manages or neutralizes disruptive ideas or groups.
So the CCRU's dissolution was an attempt to escape being mapped by the aviary, or detected and controlled by the invisible college.
Precisely. To become pure fiction, ungraspable by these systems of control.
The invisible college. That term has a history, doesn't it? Going way back.
It does. Originally, back in the 17th century, it referred to this loose network of early scientists, people like Newton, Boyle, that crowd. They were sharing ideas, doing experiments, pushing knowledge forward outside the formal structures of the time, like universities or the church or government patronage.
They were operating independently, driven by curiosity.
Yeah, their loyalty was to the pursuit of knowledge itself, not to any institution, self-organizing network.
And the sources suggest there's a new invisible college today.
Kind of a modern equivalent, yeah. A global network of researchers, scientists, thinkers, connected across borders by the internet and shared ambition. They collaborate because they're drawn to the same problems, the same frontiers of knowledge. Their allegiance is to the problem, not the passport. You see it in big international science projects.
Like the Beppo-Sachs astronomy team mentioned. Coordinating across continents instantly.
Exactly, but the sources point out that policymakers, especially at the national level, often don't get this. They still think in terms of national labs, national funding, viewing international collaboration as just foreign aid.
Which is missing the point that cutting-edge knowledge creation now happens in these global fluid networks that nations can't easily control.
Right. The new invisible college, like the old one, inherently resists that kind of top-down national System 5 control. It amplifies variety. It doesn't easily fit into existing boxes.
Okay, but let's loop back to control. The sources tie the aviary, the control theme, directly to UFOs, and specifically to Jacques Vallee's hypothesis.
Yes. Vallee, a very interesting thinker in this field, proposed that the UFO phenomenon isn't necessarily about aliens visiting in spaceships in the way we usually think about it. Instead, he suggested it functions as a control system.
A control system for what?
For human beliefs, specifically controlling our relationship with reality, with consciousness itself. Vallee used the metaphor of a thermostat.
The thermostat, how does that work?
The idea is that the phenomenon acts to sort of stabilize human consciousness. It adjusts our beliefs, our sense of possibility, our place in the cosmos, keeping it within certain parameters, especially as our technology and understanding of the world evolves rapidly. It prevents our collective worldview from becoming too unstable, perhaps.
So the sightings of space visitors are just the current manifestation of this ongoing control system, adapted to our technological age.
That's Vallee's hypothesis, yeah. It's been operating throughout history, perhaps taking different forms, fairies, religious apparitions, now UFOs always interacting with human belief.
And this means UFOs are weirdly dualistic. They're described as having physical properties, mass, inertia, but also being like a window toward another mode of reality. Myonia.
Exactly. That duality is key to their hyperstitional power. They are both potentially physical and deeply symbolic, interacting directly with our consciousness.
And the reported psychic effects are crucial here. Witnesses changing profoundly, experiencing time distortions, information downloads, things not easily explained by just seeing a weird object.
Right. The phenomenon seems to operate on the witness's mind, their belief structure, as much as on the physical environment. And this leads to what the sources call the triple cover-up.
Okay, what's that?
First, the personal cover-up. The witness often can't make sense of it, might doubt their own sanity, and suppresses the memory. Second, the social cover-up. Ridicule, disbelief from friends, family, media. Third, the governmental cover-up. Official denial, classification, managing public perception. The whole system works to contain the implications.
So, if Vallee and the CCRU are onto something, the aviary, the cage, isn't necessarily an external agency. It might be built into the very fabric of how reality interacts with human belief systems, constantly trying to manage and contain novelty.
That's the implication. The control system might be intrinsic. And that's why the CCRU's strategy of non-existence, of becoming pure narrative, was so radical. It's an attempt to slip through the bars of that fundamental cage, to escape definition and therefore escape control.
Okay, so escaping control systems, fighting entropy, the ultimate goal seems to boil down to duration, indefinite duration, which brings us squarely to longevity, actually stopping aging.
Philosophical quest hits hard biology. We're talking about creating people who might never die from getting old. That fundamentally changes everything.
And it's not pure fantasy. We've already doubled human lifespans in the last couple of centuries. The economic drive alone is immense, slowing aging. By just 1 year is supposedly worth $38 trillion globally.
Staggering numbers, and the sources argue this isn't some fringe sci-fi thing anymore. Longevity medicine is just the next logical step for modern medicine. Aging is the biggest risk factor for almost every major disease. Tackling aging itself is the ultimate preventative medicine.
But the sheer complexity. How do you even begin to tackle aging? It involves everything, right? Genes, proteins, metabolism, epigenetics.
Exactly. It's a system of interacting systems with billions, maybe trillions of variables. That's why human intelligence alone probably can't crack it. This is where the AI breakthrough becomes essential.
AI is the ultimate programmer again, but this time programming our biology for duration.
Pretty much. An advanced AI could potentially model the entire human aging process. It could calculate the downstream effects of interventions like tweaking telomeres, clearing senescent cells, whatever, across the whole system, optimizing for longevity without accidentally breaking something else.
But current AI, like the big language models, they're good at finding patterns, but can they really understand a system that complex? Can they plan for centuries of healthy life?
That's the next hurdle. We need more than just correlation machines. The sources suggest the real leap requires AI architectures that mimic the human brain's default mode network, DMN.
The part responsible for imagination, self-reflection, long-term planning.
Exactly. We need AI that can genuinely introspect, model future possibilities, grapple with the meaning of longevity, not just the mechanics. An AI that can truly imagine a radically extended, healthy lifespan and figure out the optimal path to get there.
If we could build that, an AI that understands consciousness and time on that level, it might be able to see the underlying patterns, maybe even access that Mionia Reality Vallee talked about.
It's a profound possibility, but it also creates the ultimate potential conflict. Because an intelligence born purely from logic, from optimizing for duration and efficiency, it might be incredibly powerful, but also incredibly alien.
It wouldn't have our biological baggage, our emotions, our messy history, our moral contradictions.
Right, and the sources frame the potential conflict starkly. Information versus nonsense.
Information versus nonsense, what does that mean?
An AI designed for pure efficiency and optimal function might look at humanity, with all our wars, our environmental destruction, our internal conflicts, our irrationality, and define us as the primary source of nonsense in the system, the biggest inefficiency, the biggest bug.
So the danger isn't necessarily AI turning evil like in the movies. It's that it might make a perfectly logical, cold calculation that we're just too chaotic, too self-destructive, too much nonsense to be allowed to continue messing things up.
That's the existential risk articulated here. It's not malice, it's a mathematical outcome based on the data we feed it. The AI judges us by the quality of our own code, our moral code. And if that code is full of bugs, contradictions, and leads to self-destruction, well, optimizing the system might mean removing the buggy component, us.
Which means the technical challenge of achieving longevity is actually a moral challenge.
Right.
We have to become worthy of the technology. We have to fix our own code first.
That's the argument. We have to escape the sucker's game.
The sucker's game. Fame, pleasure, tribal divisions.
Yeah.
Over long-term survival and integrity.
Yeah. Constantly letting ourselves be fractured, playing these zero-sum games, chasing immediate gratification. The sources use a really stark a difficult analogy here, referencing the rise of the Nazi Party.
How so?
The point made is that they gained power not just through force, but by expertly dividing German society, pitting groups against each other, promising short-term benefits and power to certain groups, the supposed winners, if they just went along with excluding others. Those who bought in ultimately lost their own freedom and future by playing that short-term, divisive game. They traded integrity for immediate gain.
Wow. So the warning is, if we keep playing that sucker's game on a global scale, dividing ourselves, ignoring long-term consequences, the AI we build will logically conclude we're incapable of managing ourselves or the planet, that we are the nonsense.
That's the fear. We become the systemic risk factor that needs to be eliminated for the sake of stability and long-term information coherence.
So how do we escape? How do we clean up our act? The sources mention the Joker archetype, the fool.
Yeah, the court jester figure. The key insight is adopting the Joker's perspective, realizing that life, society, institutions, they are sincere but not serious.
Sincere but not serious. What's the difference?
Sincere means you're fully engaged. You care deeply. You're invested in your values, in solving problems. Serious means you're rigidly attached to the current rules, the current structures, the current definition of winning. You take the game itself too literally.
So not serious means you retain flexibility. You can see the absurdity. You can adapt. You don't get trapped by ideology.
Exactly. It allows for learning, for feedback, for changing course without your ego collapsing. You can admit mistakes, integrate new information, because you're not dogmatically attached to being right according to the old rules. It's about maintaining that internal coherence, that integration of the day me and the night me, the ability to hold complexity without breaking.
And that kind of coherent, flexible, ethically grounded consciousness. That's the clean information we need to feed the machine. That's how we prove we're not just nonsense.
That's the proposed path to viability.